Why, hello there, Knives Tale here. I do hope this video finds you well. I'd like to say thank you for joining me here. And this is a review of this knife, the SRM Twin. For transparency, I would like to say that SRM Knives sent this knife in to me for free, which is really, really cool of them. One of the first companies to do so, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. But it will not affect my review. I'm going to try to be as completely fair and unbiased, and well, I'm going to treat this like every other knife. It wouldn't help to anybody if I said something like, "Oh my god, it's the most amazing thing ever," if it's not, right? Right. That would kind of defeat the purpose of it, so I'm going to be completely honest on this. So, this is the SRM Twin. It's a relatively small knife. Let's get into specs, and then we can actually start talking about this knife, as there are a number of things that I think are important to mention. Though I will say, I actually do think this is a pretty good knife. I think it's a really cool knife. It's a really interesting design. It's making some compromises for this design. So I'm not going to say criticize some of the things that it could do better, because, well, this is definitely a knife where the design language is important. Blade length is just under 3 inches. I'd say that's like, I'd call that maybe 2.9, maybe 2.95. It is definitely under 3 inches. The 3-inch mark definitely seems to hit the, you can't really tell on screen there, but from where I'm sitting, the 3-inch mark seems to like hit right around there. So it's something you might be able to get away with if you have a limit on knife blade length. The overall length is just a hair under 7 inches overall, with just a hair over 4 inches. So yeah, that makes sense on the handle. That's nice when it makes sense and everything works out. When it doesn't, that usually gets me doing a double take and figuring out what the heck I've done wrong, but didn't have to do that here. Comparisons to our small knife, Civivi Elementum, and our full-size knife, this Civivi Conspirator. Pretty stock standard knives. This is full-size, 3.5 inches of blade. This is a small knife, which is also just... The Civivi Elementum says it's under 3 inches of blade, but if you actually measure the blade and right to the front of the handle, it basically hits 3 inches on the dot. And that is shown here by basically being just a tiny hair longer than the SRM, despite the handle being approximately the same length. I'd say, if anything, the SRM actually hits just under that 3-inch mark, while the Civivi is very questionable and close. Oh, one last comparison would be the 2 AA battery comparison, which I always seem to try and forget. You basically have 2 AA batteries worth of grip length here, so yeah, I don't think you're actually going to have as much trouble holding on to this thing as you might think for such a small knife, which is a nice touch. Thickness compared to the Elementum, it is a little thicker, or at least it seems to be a little thicker. However, it is important to note that the inlays on this knife are, well, at their apex, they might be flat, but for the most part, it is radiused. Yeah, it's a little flat at the top, but it feels fully contoured. It's very close to being fully contoured. So that will, of course, oftentimes add a little bit of thickness, but it really isn't that thick. Let's check this real fast, shall we? Yeah, okay. Does it taper at all? I don't know. Let's see. Okay, it's slightly thinner than the Elementum still, despite that. Okay, I'm going to have to try to get underneath there. Okay, so it might actually taper a tiny bit towards the... Yeah, it seems like it tapers a little bit towards the end. That's odd. How about we get up in here? Okay, according to this, it actually is thinner at the pivot and gets a little bit wider as it goes down. So it's thinner up here than the Elementum, wider back here. Not by a huge amount in either direction. Wait, no, the Elementum's actually thinner still, isn't it? I'm, like, potatoing out on this. up here, it's 495 thousandths. Yeah, okay. I knew I wasn't losing my mind. It is a little thicker than the Adamantium, but it gets a little even thicker, closer to the Conspirator at its thickest. Interesting. Was not expecting that. It's a nice touch, though, considering a little added thickness helps probably protect it against this clip feeling like too much of a presence there. That's a smart move, honestly. Oh, I'm not done with the stupid calipers, duh. I have to check the blade stock. And that's going to be hard. Or is it? 96 thousandths? Yeah, it looks like here where it's at its thickest, it's about 96 thousandths behind the edge. One thing I have to say about SRM is I've gotten 2 of their knives now, and they don't have necessarily the most bite on their knives, but they come with an almost polished edge. Like, this is super reflective, and it's stayed pretty. I mean, I haven't used this thing hard. It's not a hard to use knife, but behind the edge on this knife looks to be about 10, 11 thousandths. It's pretty thin behind the edge. It does get, of course, thick a little bit quickly because, I mean, that is not a lot of room for it to drop down. You know, it's not a long grind. They've made this a very dagger-esque thing. Like I said, it's about the aesthetic, which is perfectly fine. Normally, I'd complain about that if this was like all the way up here and yet it was still that thick. Yeah, I'd complain, but this is clearly the aesthetic they were going for, so there's not much to say. Despite that, however, at its very base, it is still pretty darn thin, even for, or especially for a knife that's ground in this manner. They managed to get it decently thin, so I'm not going to complain too hard. Or at all, really, like I said. I'm fully understanding that the aesthetic's important here. Weight. Can you see the 2.4? Why is that fighting? I don't know what that's doing. 2.49 ounces. It is super light. I mean, you're getting more than an ounce an inch, despite really having quite a lot going on here. I'm quite impressed that they managed to get it down this light. I mean, there are full steel liners in there on this little thing, and yet it's still more than an ounce an inch, which is nice to see. Hardware check. T8 pivot. T6. T6 everything else. Okay. I mean, I'd prefer T8s all the way around, but for such a small knife, if you feel that you could probably get a T8 sized tooling mark in there on that size of a screw, but I'd prefer T8 all around, but I'm not going to be like, oh my god, it's out of the general vicinity of so many other knives that use T6s. It's not doing anything too strange there. And I have not had this apart, but I have tightened down the pivot. I haven't actually felt the T6s. Let's see how they feel if I... No, that feels fine. Yeah, that feels actually a relatively deep T6. That's not bad. I'm not going to mess with the, whatever the screws on this crossbar lock are, but whatever. Oop, that was me. Okay, so I think we are done with the specs. Yes, we are. So, this knife clearly is a faux dagger. It is sharpened on one side, not the other side. It is extremely sleek in the pocket. Much like the Swift, the other SRM knife that I did, though that one's a super ultra budget knife, this one falls just outside the budget knife category, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but this thing folds completely into the handle. You can still touch the spine here, so it's a good thing they didn't make this double edge. They need to cut down that blade a little bit, or make it seat a little deeper somehow. The blade steel is N690. The handle is, this particular one has this G10, which I actually kind of like the way they finished this G10. It almost gives like a carbon fiber look to it, but it seems to just be G10. And it would be like it's not quite carbon fiber, but it doesn't quite look like G10. It's kind of doing its own thing, but it's nice. There are a number of variants. There's a micarta variant. There's a crazy colored G10 variant. There's some stuff you can get here. There's a white G10 with a black blade variant if you want to go sort of the reverse tux, which I actually like that one. I considered that one, but I decided to check out something a little more plain. And this, the actual handle material, I wasn't 100% sure. I thought I could figure out what it was based on the unboxing, but I have confirmed with SRM that it is in fact aluminum, and it is a clamshell aluminum construction that is actually finished quite nicely. The entire thing feels like it's put together and finished pretty solidly for such a small little thing. I mean, even the crossbar lock is pretty small on this thing. But folds all in. Now let's just talk about this blade real fast. The edge is surprisingly all right. It's actually held its edge a little bit better than I was expecting for N690, which, I mean, like, again, I have not put this through a thing extensive. This is not a heavy-duty knife. This is a light-duty knife. This is not a super slicer because of the thicker geometry and just the amount of drag that this style of blade shape is going to create. It just will, because you've got fuller here and everything like that. However, it is reasonably sharp. N690 should be very, very similar, I believe, to 154 cm. Like, very similar. Maybe slightly less edge retention and slightly more corrosion resistance, something like that. But, like, minuscule amounts. It should be pretty similar. The sharpening choil is there, and it is on both sides to keep the symmetry going. And the plunge grind is actually at the highest point, or just about at the highest point of the sharpening choil, which is about all you can ask for from a company, which is no problem. The stop pin is internal and attached to the blade, which is more than you can ask for from a lot of knives. But they did it here, so that's a nice thing to see. It actually presents pretty well symmetrically, despite the fact, of course, that one side's sharpened, and that throws things off a little bit. But the symmetry's not bad, especially for, you know, not a knife that's not, you know, what, $400. A lot of times you see some of these grinds being on some of the more expensive stuff, and it's like, okay, you have to expect perfect symmetry. This is under $100, and this is pretty decent. They do have a code here and here. This is the code for the name of the knife, I believe. It doesn't really need to be there. It is also known as the Twin. And I guess that's another code that they're using for models or something. I don't necessarily care to see them there, but alright. I did say this on the Swift. There's no real reason to put SRM on the blade, especially because they use their logo on the pivot. That is SRM right there. So that doesn't really need to be there. I would really like it if these were removed off of the blade and just the N690. And if you wanted to leave the code there, that's fine. For the model, that's not really getting in the way, and it's tiny. You can barely see it. But I wouldn't mind seeing that. It would be even cleaner presentation, which would be nice. And again, their logo on the pivot looks perfectly good. So, but that's not the worst looking thing on a blade. That's not a giant branding or anything like that, and it's fine, especially for the price point. Moving on from the blade, you have the actual actuation method, which is this very, very low profile, I mean, it basically is invisible, wheel that you can use to flick this thing out. And I have to say, this is a very nice actuation method for a crossbar lock. I was kind of skeptical or unsure of how this would play with the crossbar, because they can be, you know, mushy and not have, like, they don't have a D10. Because it's so low profile, you have to push in a little bit to get it, and that little bit makes just it feel snappy, even if it's technically not. Just the fact that you have to press into it a little bit, you're already getting a little bit of tension built up, so it comes out nice and snappy. It's actually very functional, and you can, as you just saw, index finger flick it, or front flip it, basically, or top flip it, whatever you want to call it. This works way better than I was expecting. And I mean, even the jimping's not like the perfect jimping, and yet it just works. And you can even, if you get in there, you can even slow roll. And it's kind of satisfying to slow roll. I don't know why, but it is. I think they did a pretty solid job on this. The crossbar lock should be a pretty strong lock. I will say that I thought there was play in the pivot here. However, I don't actually think it's play. I think it's the, if you hold the lock forward, I think it's just there's a tiny bit of, like, wiggle. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but just the tiniest bit of wiggle on the bar. Oh, by the way, the bar is completely encapsulated inside the blade, just to let you know. It doesn't stick out or anything like that. So it runs on a track in there, which should make it pretty hard for it to slip out or really disengage on you. But there is a tiny bit of wiggle in the bar, and that gives it the feeling of just the tiniest bit of play in there. But I don't actually think there's play in the pivot itself. It is, of course, oh, that's the wrong size bit. It is tight down, and if I hold the bar forward, yeah, I'm not getting any play there. So it's just the bar itself has this tiniest little bit of wiggle in there, and you can kind of feel it. I've had other crossbar locks that have that. And just because of this thing's so thin, and you've got, you know, the stop pin attached up there to the blade, which that, if the blade's allowed to wiggle, or I should say the crossbar lock wiggles a little bit, maybe the actual position of the stop pin wiggles, maybe that's what I'm feeling. But in the blade itself, I don't believe there's any real blade play. I think it's just in the crossbar that has just the tiniest hint of wiggle. But it seems like, I mean, it's solidly locked up. I'm not particularly worried about that. So that's good. Light duty knife, you shouldn't be doing that anyway, in all honesty. Another nice feature of the wheel opening method, I guess, on this thing is that it provides jimping in both in the open position. Not both the open position, but on both sides in the open position. That actually, like, serves some function. Like, that actually makes a pretty comfortable spot to sit on here. That's not bad. I will say that they did hit the grind when they sharpened this thing on one side. So, a little oopsie there, but that can definitely happen. I already said the aluminum's good. It is centered. As I mentioned, underneath the aluminum, you have some milled out, weight-reduced steel liners there. You can see them really well right there. Which, again, really impresses me to how they got this thing as light as it did, because usually steel liners and something like this would weigh it down, but they managed it. There is also a spacer for structural rigidity back there, despite the clamshell construction of the aluminum. The final thing to really talk about is ergos, which is, I mean, it's super neutral. Yeah, you feel the clip. It's a wire clip. You're going to feel a wire clip on almost any knife, especially one this small. However, it is not at all uncomfortable, and in fact, it's pretty darn comfortable in this sort of grip. The wire clip in my hand feels on the better side of wire clips. The clip itself is, of course, deep, pretty darn, almost super deep carry, but it is definitely a deep carry clip. I do not like the fact that there is a big flat on the end of the clip. However, as this might be more of an office carry or something like that, where you're not wearing it with super thick jeans and doing stuff like that, yeah, it's not going to be that hard to get in and out of the pocket. I have, I think, a pair of cloth pants that on right now. Yeah, I think. I don't even know what I'm wearing. And it goes right in and out. No problem with that. Or, they're, I guess, what are these? More of a stretchy material. Yeah, sure. I don't even know what I'm wearing. Don't worry about what's behind the camera. I'm not. But, let's not go there. Good flex, good retention. While some people really, really don't like these wire clips, they do work. So, it's fine, especially on lighter stuff. Overall, this is a pretty darn solid and nice design that has a lot of aesthetics going for it. You're compromising just a bit on the geometry, but for the most part, it's pretty solid. I wouldn't mind seeing a larger version of this, personally. Up everything. Just make this big tougher, make the grinds a little taller, maybe even do it like a hollow grind on both sides, just to keep it symmetrical, and again, you can lose your, ooh, yeah, it's pretty sharp. I don't know. Yeah, did you see that? I just caught myself on the edge, and it yeah. That's actually quite sharp. But as I said, get rid of the SRM, do a hollow grind, and make it like a 3.7-inch blade. Just give us something crazy cool. That would be really interesting. And this is of a high enough quality that I would say they could pull it off pretty successfully. Slightly bigger, chunkier crossbar lock. The bar itself is pretty small, and the what do you even call these? The knobs that stick off the bar that you interface with for the crossbar lock, they're pretty small too. In fact, let me get another crossbar lock, say, well, Benchmade here. As you can see, it is much smaller. It is a small knife. This is, of course, the Barrage, which is a reasonably large knife, but yeah. In fact, this knife has more. While I don't have side-to-side feel in this one, because it is just overall chunkier and thicker and bigger, this one actually has even more little wiggle to the crossbar, so I'm not too worried about it. But the only thing left to say about this is the price. The price on this particular variant is $84. I think the newest variant with the crazy G10 and possibly the micarta variants, I'm not sure, go up to $90. Well, $89.99 or $95. This is about $84. It's not a budget knife. I do wish it was a budget knife. I wish this came in at the $75 mark. I do think there's enough to substantiate it being right around the top end of the budget territory. I mean, clamshell aluminum construction with this kind of fit and finish, yeah, it's quite solid. I'm not saying it's totally off the mark, but I do think it would be a little bit more appealing if it just hit the top of the budget mark. However, I'm also not super angry at it. I mean, it's stylized and kind of in its own area, so I'm not sure if it should fall cheaper or not. N690, I mean, you see 154cm being on top-end budget knives to knives up to slightly over $100 sometimes, right? So they're not using a steel that is on the bottom level of a budget knife. They're not doing fit and finish that is. They've got aluminum here that they're finishing nicely. It's in the right ballpark. I'm just not 100% sure. Let me know what you think, where this thing should fall in the price point. I think it's cool enough to be worth checking out, and unique enough to be worth checking out at this price, even if I wish it was just a tiny bit less. But that'll finish everything up on the SRM Twin here, and I want to say thank you very, very much for watching. If you've stuck around till now, and even if you haven't, anybody who's watched any portion of this, I, of course, appreciate. And I'm done, so I'm going to see you all later, and I hope you have a great day.